Come all ye young fellas and listen to me. I'll sing you a song of Miramichi. If you work on the river or cut the big trees, if you've roamed far away but your heart wouldn't leave, then you know you've been hooked on the Miramichi. You'll always be hooked on the Miramichi.
Yeah, well, the foreman was with me and the machine was cutting wood. And it didn't seem at that time it was that much of a wind, but all you could see it was tree coming down, and the operator of one machine phoned me up and he said, I don't know what's wrong. He said, the wood, there's no wood. He said, if I lift the tree up and the head, and he said, it would cut, the wind would snap the tree right off the head.
They call it the Christmas Mountain Blowdown. At noon on Monday, November the 7th, 1994, the forest looked like this. By evening, it looked like this. More than 30 million trees, 1 million cords of wood, smashed down by winds up to 150 kilometers per hour. They were scattered over 12,000 hectares in northwestern Northumberland County, New Brunswick. That's over 30,000 acres. The next day, the Christmas Mountain Blowdown was already becoming a legend for Miramichiers. This video tells the story of what happened and how the Miramichi people responded to this crisis in their own forest. More than 600 people planned and carried out the largest harvest of blown down trees in New Brunswick history. During the 4-hour storm, woods crews were scared for their safety. Trees and parts of trees were flying everywhere and crashing to the ground. Even 30-inch thick pine trees were snapped off like matchsticks. It's likely that some moose, deer, and other large animals were actually surrounded by massive areas of cross-piled trees. The fierce winds howled through one of New Brunswick's most remote forest regions. Some call it the Big South. It's drained by the Little Southwest Miramichi River, then the Pissaquit and the Tobic watersheds. Others call it the Christmas Mountains, because hills that surround the North Pole stream are named after St. Nicholas and his reindeer. Environmental groups had been urging government to stop the Repap company from harvesting in these Christmas Mountains and to declare it a wilderness area. In fact, a group calling themselves the Friends of Christmas Mountains held a protest on the site the day after the blowdown. Most of the blowdown occurred west of Bald Mountain. Patches were scattered for 35 miles, from Heath Steel Mines southwest to the Plaster Rock Highway. Most of the blowdown was on Repap Crown License number 4, some other was on other Crown licenses, and some was on freehold land. What caused this massive blowdown? Certainly the extremely high wind speeds did the damage, just as they did on Quebec's Gaspé Peninsula the very same day. The other factor was the condition of the forest. It couldn't stand up to the fierce swirls and gusts of wind. Most of the trees were balsam fir, and most of them were more than 80 years old, over mature. Old age, rot, disease, and other storms had been knocking over these trees for years. Also, some earlier clear-cuts had allowed the wind to smash into the forest edge. That wind on November the 7th, 1994, was the coup de grace for millions of trees that already had 1 foot in the grave. It snapped them off or ripped their shallow roots out of the ground. Then even strong, healthy trees were exposed to the wind's mighty force, and they too went crashing down. Well, what to do with a blowdown forest? The blowdown forced government, industry, environmentalists, and even the public to quickly decide what had to be done. Some environmentalists wanted nature to take its own course, keep the area as a wilderness, and let scientists study how it renewed itself. They said this was the last remaining natural old-growth forest in the province, and it should be preserved. However, government, industry, workers, and some other environmentalists said the blowdown must be harvested. The wood was needed to maintain the province's long-term wood supply for pulp mills, sawmills, veneer mills, and other uses. They said the tangled blowdown would be an easy target for massive forest fires, and that insects and disease would very soon destroy the wood. They decided to harvest as much as possible within 12 months, while still protecting the environment, wildlife, and the future forest. The day after the storm, Repap moved men and equipment into the blowdown. They struggled for a month under difficult and very dangerous conditions to harvest the tangled mess.
I noticed the slow going too. Because the trees are crisscrossed and fell on top of each other, it's even more difficult to pick them up and skin them and cut them.
Oh yes, we was planning to try with a guy with a chainsaw to cut the trees at the bottom there, but I think that's impossible to do because it's too dangerous concerning safety.
Snow, of course, stopped the operations, and a lot of people said it would be impossible to harvest the blowdown wood before it rotted. But not everyone was ready to give up. On November the 10th, just 3 days after the storm, Repap and the Department of Natural Resources staff had people in planes and helicopters taking aerial photos and assessing the damage. They mapped areas that had 25%, 50%, and even 100% blowdown. Some of these areas were small, some larger, more than 400 hectares, which is about 1,000 acres in size. Old blowdown from a 1990 storm complicated their job. The millions of trees looked like a giant plate of spaghetti or a game of pickup sticks.
We had spent, say, 3 or 4 days mapping, and it just seemed everywhere we went we could find large areas, but what was worse in some ways was that we found a lot of small areas that were inaccessible, that were going to be lost from the wood supply.
And now it was time to plan, plan, plan. Throughout the winter, everyone planned for the spring and summer harvest. Department of Natural Resources and Energy, Repap, wood contractors, and the labor force worked together. Minister of Natural Resources Alan Graham and the industry agreed that a massive salvage operation had to be organized immediately. They had only one season to salvage $100 million worth of wood before worms ruined the trees for sawmills. So the minister asked other companies to help Repap with the harvest. He gave royalty incentives to help cover the higher costs of harvesting in that blowdown area. Companies such as Irving, Stone, Fraser's, Avenor, Juniper Lumber, and Chaleur Lumber all took part. They agreed to take wood from Repap's Crown license in 1995 and share their Crown wood with Repap in future years. Sub-licensee sawmills agreed to accept some of the blowdown wood from licensees who were involved in the salvage. Besides all of Repap's regular License 4 woods crews, License 3 crews would also be needed from as far away as Doketown, Renouse, Blackville, Rogersville, Neguac, and Tracadie. Other crews from Grand Falls, Edmundston, Campbellton, and Bathurst were added to Repap's regular workforce. Crews from Newcastle Lumber Limited also did their share.
And it was all wood that was scheduled to be cut over the next 15 years or less. But because of the blowdown, there had to be a salvage effort directed to recover that wood in a much shorter period. So the total amount of wood cut is not different on Crown land in New Brunswick, but the concentration of where the cutting would be had to change to recover that blowdown.
In the spring, with the plans on paper, it was time to act. Tractors, graders, and excavators built roads through the blowdown and improved the main road system so people and equipment could travel safely. The heavy traffic concentrated in the Big South was going to be a concern for everyone, including the public. Bridges and culverts had to be built without allowing soil and fine silt to get into the streams to damage fish spawning beds. Even in the blowdown, Department of Natural Resources and Energy staff insisted on high standards of stream protection. Woods crews were given special 2 weeks training on operating their equipment on slopes and in tangled messes of broken trees. No one wanted to be injured or killed by trees falling on them or springing up unexpectedly. Trail cutting crews all had extensive experience. Power saw operators would have the most dangerous job in all of the blowdown. Power saw operators had a role in deciding whether or not they would take part in the harvest of the blowdown. They knew it would be dangerous. Every move would be a major decision. What tree to cut first, watching for spring poles, dead stubs, chicos, widowmakers, and turned-up roots. The heat would be exhausting, climbing over and under the cross-piled trees in the hot sun, often without shade even to eat their lunches. One of the great frustrations for power saw operators was separating the old blowdown from the new blowdown trees. The older, sap-rotten blowdown is no good at all for the pulp mills or sawmills. It would be wasted effort taking the rotten trees to roadside. What to do with these broken trees was another dilemma. Fire prevention and suppression always had top priority. The Miramichi has more than its share of lightning storms and other fire hazards. The Christmas Mountains blowdown had the potential for another great Miramichi fire. In October 1825, 3 million acres burned in just 4 days, one of the largest fires in North American history. This time, crews were trained to prevent fires from starting and to respond quickly to any fire. They knew how difficult it would be to escape from a fire through that tangled blowdown.
And I guess we had a few close calls where a few equipment caught fires, and because of the quick response and readiness of our fire crew, we prevented a potential disaster.
Every crew had a mobile water tank nearby. Department of Natural Resources put emergency measures in place with staff, equipment, and water bombers. It paid off. 1995 was the hottest, up to 37 degrees centigrade, and the driest summer on record, with extremely high fire hazard indexes. However, a few fires started by lightning and logging equipment were quickly put out by well-trained and well-equipped crews, both on the ground and in the air. Everyone agreed the water bomber crew from Chatham made the difference in such dry, explosive conditions. Except for several crews who traveled morning and night, all the crews in the blowdown stayed in the woods all week. So accommodation was needed for woods crews who would be away from home. 5 camps were operated at strategic locations. The largest camp at the Savogal airstrip was home to 140 men from May through to November. It was operated by Force Protection Limited for Repap. Cooks in each camp started serving hearty breakfasts at 5 a.m. They sent ample packed lunches with the crews so they could eat lunch at the job sites. At 5 p.m., everyone was back at the camps for supper. Then there was time for a shower, maybe a game of pool, a game of cards, and a lunch before bedtime. Finally, it's May. The snow is disappearing. It's time to harvest the blowdown. Even the most experienced woods workers had never worked in such awesome conditions. They couldn't walk through it without climbing over or ducking under the cross-piled trees. Forest technicians worked extremely hard to mark boundaries with ribbons along streams and special wildlife areas. Much of the layout was done on snowshoes in the wintertime. Every stream, even if blocked with trees, had to have a 60 to 100 meter buffer zone left on both sides for stream and wildlife protection. Every day, over 600 people fanned out into the forest in trucks and other equipment. They were all working according to the grand plan. They knew exactly which area to harvest. Power saw and skidder crews were sent to the safest areas. They had to work extra hard just to make a day's pay, even with the higher rates for harvesting in the blowdown areas. A few crews worked with horses to selectively salvage blowdown areas in sheep house country. Skidder crews played a major role in the repap salvage operation. Day after day, they worked in the heat among the tangled mess of fallen and partly fallen trees, many uprooted, some still standing. Here, teamwork meant everything for both safety and production. A mistake could cost a life. It was a place for only trained, experienced crews.
I cut a tree, and it went up about 20 feet high and stayed right there. You had to put it down with the skidder.
Really?
I never ran so fast in all my life. He thought it was Ben Johnson.
Getting the trail started was the toughest part for both power saw and the skidder operators. Often the trees faced the wrong way or were cross-piled up to 10 feet high. There was danger in every trail. Hauling the main line and chokers was hard work itself. Trying to put the chokers on the right tree first, getting around the upturned roots and partly fallen trees, watching for stubs. It was all so much more difficult than working in standing trees. They had to put 250 to 300 trees roadside every day, or their pay would be very small. The hills were often scary to work on, even to the best operators. A wrong turn could easily overturn the skidder. Unhooking chokers at the roadside was not always easy. The pile had to be neat and square to help the delimbers and slasher operators that would come behind to process these full trees at roadside. Not all the skidders worked in the areas where more than 50% of the trees were blown down. Several skidder crews spent the entire season along roadsides, selectively harvesting the blowdown trees from among the mostly standing trees along the Fraser Birchall, Slacks Lake, and Spruce Lake roads. They delimbed the trees with power saws and piled the wood at roadside. Safety was a concern all the time. The trail cutters did what many said was impossible. They worked the entire season in the blowdown without one serious injury. It was hard work, hot, and dangerous. Partly fallen trees were potential killers. Only experienced professionals could be allowed on these operations. Standing on the wrong side of a tree could result in a broken leg. Knowing which tree to cut first could save your life. It was hard work. Owners of the big logging equipment often had the worst dilemma. They had to maneuver huge machines around the cross-piled trees and upturned roots and try to pick up the fallen, tangled, and broken logs. For example, many feller bunchers could only operate at 50% production efficiency. They're designed to grab a standing tree, cut it off at the ground, and swing it into a pile or bunch. In the blowdown, they usually had to grab a fallen tree and wrestle it out of a tangle of other trees. That's an expensive operation for machines that cost up to $400,000. That also slowed the work of the men operating the double grip processors, which depend on the feller bunchers to feed them wood. These machines, costing $450,000, grab a fallen tree, strip the branches off, and cut the logs into 8 or 16-foot lengths. Single grip processors often did the best job of sorting out the cross-piled trees. The machine operators said they also had more breakdowns of equipment under these conditions. They said their job was much more difficult than working at cutting standing trees. Negotiating fair pay rates for both equipment and people was not easy. Crews had to work 11 and 12-hour shifts, night and day. Machines had bright lights so that operators could work safely after dark. Mechanics and welders responded quickly to repair machine problems in order to minimize machine downtime for the operators. After the wood was taken to roadside by porter forwarders, it was loaded onto waiting trailers: hardwoods, softwoods, logs, pulpwood, studwood, and veneer logs. The porter operators were the follow-up team behind the processors. The truckers depended upon the porter operators to get the wood to roadside. Then trucks hauled the wood over hot, dusty roads to keep the mills supplied. It was a massive job to coordinate all of the operations so they worked together smoothly. Add in the giant KFFs, or coring feller forwarders, and it helps paint the picture of one of the most complex woods operations in Canadian history. These giant machines picked up hundreds of thousands of blown down trees and took them to roadside. The truckers were among the heroes of the blowdown salvage. Over 60 tractor trailers hauling to a dozen different mills on dangerous, dusty roads. On every hill and at every turn, there was potential for a serious accident.
We will work about around 15 hours a day to make two trips. We're a little bit in the woods and a little bit here. And we couldn't drive that fast and have to watch for the other guys. So we'll see about that. We'll see average about 15 hours a day.
Department of Natural Resources and Energy field staff had the responsibility of approving every activity prior to the salvage of any block or the construction of any road. They also made weekly inspections to ensure that crews understood the high standards for fish and wildlife protection, fire prevention, and good utilization of each tree. Another challenge was to get as many logs as possible suitable for the dozen sawmills in the region. With a great deal of effort, 50% of the wood cut on the blowdown was delivered to the sawmills. However, many blowdown trees were old balsam fir. Their split and rotten butts were a major problem for sawlog production. Scalers tried to guide crews in selecting trees that were suitable for sawmills. Operators of delimbers and slashers did their best to sort the best logs for sawmills and for the plywood veneer mill at Nelson Forest Products. The delimbers removed the branches at roadside. The slasher operators tried to get the best parts of each tree for the sawmills.
Basically, that wood up there is 80 to 90% fir, so you had all fir saw logs, generally not very big. You had the splits and so on that went along with the saw logs as part of the blowdown damage.
Crews were also trying to protect wildlife and their habitat. The windstorm had disrupted everything for every creature. Deer and moose couldn't travel their old routes, although there was very little evidence that they actually died in the blowdown. Birds, squirrels, chipmunks, foxes, and other small creatures lost their homes when old trees and snags came crashing down. Beavers and fish had their waterways blocked. On the other hand, crews found many partridge families down underneath the tangled trees. Mother hens laid their eggs and raised their young right in the middle of the blowdown. Workers also saw many chickadees and various hawks. Gourbies were the most friendly of the birds. Many made friends with the workers, even eating out of their hands. This is also good country for pine martens and flying squirrels, and several species of birds that like mature forest conditions. The blowdown, however, would significantly change their habitats.
Animals that were used to protection that was there previously will be gone, but others will come in. There will be a change in the species that will be observed all the time in that area.
At the office was the support system for all of the people working in the woods. The people in the offices were the key to communication, coordination, and emergency response. Accounting people kept track of the costs and made sure that people got paid.
Well, I think the district superintendents and the technicians and the scalers and everybody had a lot of extra workload this year. But everybody kept their sense of humor and it worked out well.
By November 1995, 80% of the blowdown harvest was completed, and it will continue in 1996. The future forest in the Big South Christmas Mountain region had already been born before the blowdown. Before the wind and the harvest, young plants and trees were growing and getting ready to replace the old balsam fir and other older growth. They will soon green up the openings left by the blowdown and the salvage operations. Most of the harvesting was done by clear cutting, some in small patches, some up to 400 hectares. The provincial government gave special permission to clean up these large patches that were much larger than its regulated 100 hectares. Of course, there will always be arguments about whether it's better to let nature have complete control of the forest, or if people should clear cut or select cut the forest. In fact, all these conditions exist in this forest. Buffer zones around waterways were left uncut and will be left entirely to nature's wishes. Patches with less than 50% blowdown were left uncut. Other areas, such as this one at Christmas Mountains, were harvested. Here's what it looked like before the salvage. And here's the same area after harvesting. You can see the broken trees and even old blowdown trees which were left behind because the mills could not use them. You can also see the little trees already growing to replace the old forest. These trees were not planted. They are natural regrowth. Here are a few more shots before and after the crews harvested the blowdown. This is McCormick's camp, just west of Bald Mountain. Here is the same area the day after the crews finished the salvage. They did a great job. This view from the helicopter shows what a patch looks like from the air after the salvage is completed. Here a feller buncher continues work in the blowdown. This area on the Spruce Lake Road shows how dangerous it was for workers. All those dead stubs could easily have injured people. Removing them will make it easier for people to do silvicultural work in the future. A year after the blowdown salvage operation, most of this area will be green with new hardwood and softwood growth, all natural regrowth. Here's what the area will look like in about 5 years' time. This is all natural regeneration. In fact, there will be so many trees that silviculture crews will have to thin them out in 10 or 12 years. Without this salvage project, it would have been impossible for silviculture crews to climb through that debris. And without thinning, all those trees would remain very small and very crowded for the next 40 to 50 years. They just would not have enough space or sunlight to grow. Here are examples of a forest left to grow on its own, and another area which was thinned out so the remaining trees could grow larger and faster. The thinned areas will produce more and better wood for mills 50 to 60 years from now, and of course, more jobs in the mills and forests. Wildlife populations will also be healthy in the Christmas Mountains because of the mixture of natural and managed forest, hardwoods and softwoods, young and mature growth. Different birds and animals will move in to match each stage of the forest's regrowth. The Christmas Mountain blowdown was an unforgettable experience for woods people. It was scary, exciting, difficult, and very costly. It was an awesome demonstration of what nature can do in just a few hours. It will be remembered along with the famous Saxby Gale in 1869 that ripped through Charlotte County in southern New Brunswick. This video will give people an accurate account of the blowdown and of how people worked so hard to make the best of a bad situation. You can use this video as a benchmark to compare with what the forest looks like 10, 20, even 50 years from now. You'll be able to judge whether the right or the wrong things were done in harvesting the blowdown. Just imagine, today's teenagers will be senior citizens in 50 to 60 years when this forest is being harvested. That will be about the year 2050. They'll be able to use this video to show their children and their grandchildren what the forest looked like after the great Christmas Mountain blowdown way back there on November the 7th, 1994. They'll see pictures of their parents, grandparents, and neighbors working with their old-fashioned chainsaws and feller bunchers to harvest that blowdown. When they go fishing, hunting, nature walking, or snowmobiling, they'll talk about what it used to look like and how much the trees have grown. They'll understand that windstorms are just one of nature's ways to replace old, dying trees with new growth. They'll appreciate that the blowdown was not the end, it was just the beginning of a new forest, a transition from the old to the new generations. In Northumberland County, the Great Miramichi Fire of 1825 and the Big South Christmas Mountain blowdown of 1994 will be conversation pieces for many years to come.
He said with that sly grin, I took his hand in friendship as I gently waded in. In a tin cup placed before me was a brew of specialty, and as we sipped the special broth, he said so slyly, this river is magic, it's Miramichi magic. come over me. This giant salmon flipped his tail and knocked me to my knees. What on earth, how'd I get here flying in the breeze? I asked him, how'd you grow so big? He winked and said to me, this river is magic. It's Miramichi magic. Fill your cup, fill it up with magic.
This video is your record of the awesome power of nature and of the people's response to what nature left behind. May it also inspire you to take good care of your forest.
Now, folks, I've been accustomed to the simple kind of fun. The smiles I wear have always been authentic, everyone. To call an artificial means I never felt the need. But I'll be darned, come in, sit down and have a cup of tea. For this river is